A new CBS News Battleground Tracker finds former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders have the strongest support from African-American Democrats in early voting states. However, Biden does have a sizable lead. Maya King in Politico reports on, quote, why black voters are backing two old white guys, adding that a divide among African Americans can have major implications as we head into the fall. Maya is a fellow at Politico covering 2020 and joins me now from our Washington bureau. Maya, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So break this down for us. What in each of these candidates' platforms is resonating with voters?
Well, I think this story, the data really tells an important story here. I think for older black voters and their support of Biden, this is rooted in the 8 years that he spent as President Obama's vice president. They understand that he has the experience. He's been in the White House before. They see the demonstrated leadership and the knowledge of how these policies and how the executive branch works, and it makes them feel comfortable with their decision to support him at this point. I think with younger black voters, they're very excited about a Sanders presidency, more so than they are about a Biden presidency. I think Biden sort of reminds them of the prospect of Hillary Clinton in 2016, and they're looking for something more progressive, something more revolutionary, really. They're very excited about Sanders' criminal justice reforms, especially because they walk back a lot of the provisions of the '94 crime bill that Joe Biden wrote. And so I think that's a really important distinction. This is an age line, but it's also an ideology line.
Yeah, so let me ask you more about Senator Sanders. You mentioned criminal justice reform. How else is it that Senator Sanders appears to be reaching out, particularly to those young African-American voters?
Sure. And Sanders has a lot of young, excited black surrogates as well, who are kind of in the field talking to young black voters, and especially for those who are casting their votes for the first time and really thinking critically about who they'd like to win and who they'd like to specifically beat President Donald Trump. When they're listening to the activists in their communities, the leaders who they've seen on TV or read about on social media who are telling them Bernie Sanders is the person that I support, again, that gets them very excited, and it kind of solidifies, at least at this early stage in the race, a decision that they're willing to make.
So you mentioned it's not just a generational divide when you talk about Biden and Sanders, it's also this notion of an ideological divide. So how should we be properly sort of comparing Joe Biden's support from these older African-American voters with Sanders' support from younger voters?
Well, I think that we'll be able to tell even more after Thanksgiving and Christmas when these families, these black families, really start having serious conversations about who they're supporting. But when you're thinking about it along ideological and age lines, it makes a lot of sense. I mentioned before that for younger black voters, this is the first time that they'll be able to cast their vote, and they're looking for someone who excites them and who has policies that they can really directly relate to. I think that Joe Biden just isn't quite the most exciting candidate for them, and they remember some of the excitement around newcomer Bernie Sanders in 2016, and they're looking to continue that momentum. While older black voters ideologically and just sort of logically are very careful voters, they know that the stakes are very high here. They don't necessarily want to waste their vote. And so for that reason, they've really taken to Joe Biden, and they think that he's the surefire choice.
And Maya, you report, quote, the irony of two white septuagenarians commanding majority support among African Americans despite running in a historically diverse Democratic field isn't lost on black elected officials, operatives, and voters. What are the broader implications of these two candidates garnering this much support this early on?
Well, black voters are aware of their influence in this election, and they know that people are counting on their vote. The broader implications here, again, I'll say it's very early in this race, but it does look like if you have the majority of the black vote, you can bet that you can carry that into the nomination.
And you also write that this time around, African-American Democrats aren't concerned about the optics of not supporting African-American candidates. So if that is the case, what does that mean potentially for Senators Kamala Harris and Cory Booker?
Well, it means that they have to do a little bit more work to demonstrate to black voters that they're up to the task. Black voters are looking for people who are battle-tested. Again, Joe Biden has already spent 8 years in the White House. Bernie Sanders has been on the political scene as a senator for decades. These are the things that black voters look at when they say, I need someone who can not only beat Donald Trump, but also show leadership in the White House, be able to pass progressive legislation, and be able to pass the policy agenda that black voters have been counting on since 2016 when President Obama left the White House.
All right, Maya King for us in Washington. Maya, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.